go. Welcome, Marteka. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Harriet. Nice to see you.
Hello, 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 hello. Look at all those books. Like, we're going to have a book off between you and me, Michael.
It's not real. It's a fake background.
It's just wallpaper. You've been rumbled. Okay. So let me introduce these folks. I'm going to start off by saying, like, what the heck do you understand by the term psychological safety? Because it's been bandied around. It's a kind of very buzzy word at the moment. What help us unpick it. What does that mean? Marteka, what would you describe as?
For me, I guess, pre-lockdown, post-lockdown, I think that it's probably changed meanings slightly. I think for me, probably before, COVID, we were talking about, being able to speak your mind, creativity, sort of, sticking your neck out without fear of reprisals. And I think as we go into, returning back to the office, I think psychological safety has taken on a whole new meaning in the sense of, is it going to be safe to go to the office? I think there's kind of a physical element now in terms of commuting and being in the office space and also navigating those relationships again. I think it can be strange, can't it? It's whether you how you greet someone, and do you sit next to them, don't you, the elbows, it's all changed, hasn't it? We have to relearn how to communicate again and what's socially acceptable. And I think we've all got very different boundaries around this. So, and it's really finding out kind of where people are in terms of, what they're comfortable with.
It really feels like the kind of first day at school. It's funny, I've got kids and I just remember that whole, like, am I wearing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And where's the classroom? And is that teacher going to be a nightmare? And even I'm finding that with my coaches who are, say, going to be continuing working from home. It's like, as this dynamic shifts, what are the rules? Who am I? How do I engage with this?
I think what's safe for one person is not safe for another. Some people are, people I talk to are desperate to get back to work. They feel like flowers that haven't been watered, because they're quite gregarious, kind of sociable people. Other people are kind of, I think a lot of people actually are quite frightened of going back to work. It's almost like they've developed, agoraphobia, and they feel quite comfortable at home. They quite like being at home, but they realize it's not good for them. So it's a tough, like Marteka was saying, it's a tough question to answer, because it's kind of slightly, I think there's some principles though. I mean, I was thinking about this a lot, and there's some really interesting research done by a guy called Aaron Antonovsky, who studied Holocaust survivors. And it's really interesting because, it's more complicated than this, but essentially what he found was 70% of people who survived the Holocaust were ill. Became quite ill physically and mentally and so on. It's what you might expect. But 30% did well. 30% went on to, have families and relationships and jobs, careers, blah, and all the rest of it. And he thought, well, that's really interesting. What are the characteristics that help these people survive? And I think we can use that as a basis for thinking of psychological safety and what you can do at work, or what if you're an employer, what you can do for your employees. And there are three things. The first characteristic, he called it all a sense of coherence. So the individual feels a sort of coherence with the rest of the world. They're in line with the rest of the world. And how do you do that? Well, there are three things. The first thing is people need to have a sense of kind of predictability and understand. So they understand what's happening to them. So they know what's going to happen. They know what time they start. They know what time they finish. They know whether they could use the water cooler or not, etc., because people get very anxious about that. So if you're like a manager or employee, be clear about what the boundaries are. And if you're an employee, find that stuff out, because being able to comprehend your world, is kind of helpful, to being resilient. Because otherwise, it's just like things that happen just end up like noise, things happening to you outside. You know what I mean? So that's one thing. It's called it comprehensibility. The second one is having a sense of agency. So you've got a little bit of control over your life and over what you do, not things are just being done to you. So make sure, if you want to sit with people, ask them and sit with them. Or if you feel a bit awkward about that, just say, look, I prefer to sit over here by myself, so you've got some control, so you're not being forced into doing things you don't want to do. So it's having a sense of agency, that you've got some control over what you do. And the final one, which I think is really, 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 really important, which is a sense of meaning and purpose. So people who did well after the Holocaust, they've felt their life had meaning and purpose.
So those three things then, the comprehension, the kind of predictability, the agency, and the meaning or purpose. And that's where the comprehension really resonates with me. I remember reading some research that people preferred. They played a game where if you pick up a rock, then they might get an electric shock. And they preferred to know than there was a version of the game where they didn't know. So like that really resonates, and there's a lot of comments on the chat about, there's a lot about clothes, not gonna lie, and I'm so glad, because I was like I tried my trousers on, it's like, well, they're not coming with me because they no longer fit. So exactly. So Marteka, I'm fascinated. I've read some of your stuff around kind of feeling different, and as I say, like I was stressing about trousers, I was stressing about the right thing to do tomorrow. You speak very candidly about feeling different, and tell us more about that, the kind of psychological safety or non-safety about difference, as it were.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, going into the hybrid workplace, not just navigating whether I can get out of my loungewear, my sportswear that I've been comfortably rolling around in for the last few months, and get those dresses back on, which I'm really looking forward to, because 85% of my wardrobe hasn't been used for like a year. Now the question is it going to fit me? But I mean, the reality is, speaking about fitting and one size fits all, is I think one thing that we've learned kind of, in this kind of quarantine period, and sort of coming back out to the office and then not, and then coming back out again. I think that, one size doesn't fit all. And I think what's exciting about the hybrid workplace is that we've got an opportunity to actually, build back better, do things differently. And I think there's a real opportunity to think about belonging in a different way. And for me, some of that sits on the kind of intersectionality of diversity and inclusion, and how we create workplaces that accommodate difference and different people. But also, for me, psychological safety and well-being is about embracing difference and not expecting everyone to, do the same thing and show up the same way. So I think there's going to be a lot more intentionality around difference, and actually, how do we personalize well-being? How do we personalize people's returns to work?
And it's interesting you talk about that intentionality, because I say we've got a whole host of different roles and job roles here this afternoon. So for some people listening to that, they're going to be leaders, kind of going, okay, how do I create that sort of environment? And for other people, some of us might be feeling, but I've got no power. I'm not the one writing the rules, as it were. So I mean, Michael, that thing, how does that play out with the different roles, if you see what I mean? Because sometimes we've got that obvious positional power to kind of make things safe, and sometimes it doesn't feel like that. So, what were your thoughts there?
Well, if you've got the power, I think it's not rocket science. It's listening to people and, well, asking them first of all, and not asking them once, asking them 10 times what's going to help you, what's going to be good for you. And if you haven't got that power, you've probably got more power than you think you have. Actually, and I think it's about growing a backboard as well, and learning to say no, and learning to put yourself first. So this work I've been doing with NHS England, it's hilarious in a way, because the people who seem to look after themselves best are people who have dogs. So I say, go out for a walk twice a day, and they say, oh, I can't, I'm too busy. But the people who have dogs have to go out for a walk, otherwise the dog will be peeing in the house, you see. But they wouldn't go out for a walk if they didn't have a dog. And I say to them, look, you look after your dog better than you look after yourself, kind of thing, So I'm being a bit flippant, but when people go back to work, I really think they have more power and authority than perhaps they think they have. And they need to look after themselves, actually.
So
I mean, flexibility is really key, isn't it? I think, Michael was touching a little bit on that around power and autonomy. And I think that, if you've traditionally kind of worked in a model where you're kind of in the office 5 days a week, your manager kind of sits 2 rows to the right of you, and, you can sort of check in, and then all of a sudden you're in your house and you've kind of got to organize your own day and, you know, figure out how you're going to do things. I think there has been a bit of a shift in terms of autonomy, and, you know, how do we keep that going in the hybrid model? So I think one of the things that, you know, I've been using is thinking about actually how do you set up kind of psychologically informed environments in workplaces? So how do you create safe spaces? How do you create those spaces that have informal conversations and informal contact in a digital environment? How do you keep that going? So, you know, there's all these kind of different ways of working and I guess collaborating with each other that kind of fall outside of what would be more traditional, as in sitting in a room together, collaborating. So I think there's a real chance now, really, and especially for leaders. You know, I think that sometimes as a leader, we think we need to have all the answers and be all knowing. And there's something about kind of, you know, being a bit more vulnerable and showing up and saying, I've not really done this before. I'm not sure how it goes. Like, how do you want it to look? And having that input and that sort of two-way dialogue, I think it's a real shift in power and control. Which empowers people. I think, you know, vulnerability inspires connection and connects people together better. We had a really interesting discussion, thanks to George. I have to give him the credit. And we were just talking about, you know, instincts and trusting your intuition, and, you know, how children kind of adapted, and, you know, just being more in touch with that inner voice, I guess, in terms of sort of how far you push it, or, you know, how you pace your workload, or, you know, however you kind of manage your day. So I found that really insightful, actually, that, you know, we in corporate, in some ways, we're taught to kind of not trust our intuition, to follow what the process tells us. So it's kind of going back to our roots in many ways, which I think is really, or our child play state, which is where we all started.
You're going to have to give serious thought to how you manage the interpersonal relationships online, because often that gets dropped. You know, online, you know, Zoom and Teams calls often end up as being very transactional, just about work, and business. And what will happen? Well, the team will start to disintegrate and become just a bunch of individuals and not working as a proper team. So how do you prevent that? Well, you have, you know, you actually, you know, building sessions where people are banned from talking about work, and having quizzes and things like that, you know, and even that's not ideal and it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. But without that, you know, I don't know how you can keep a sense of team cohesion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of creating a safe space really comes out of the kind of diversity and inclusion kind of conversations, and being able to talk about some of these more challenging or difficult conversations in a safe space where, you know, it's okay to kind of get it wrong and say the wrong thing and not be sure about how it's done, you know, not have the way kind of formulated. And it's like, I don't know if you've ever learned a new language before, but, you know, you kind of feel embarrassed to talk because you know that you're kind of talking a bit, you know, like a child or not very well. And, you know, you kind of, as an adult, you want to be competent, you want to know, and actually, you know, being not knowing and the uncertainty can make us feel quite vulnerable. And I think that's one of the links for me anyway with grief or losing our routines, is that, you know, it does put us in touch with an area of ourselves that's vulnerable and where we're not knowing. And, you know, how do we navigate that? It's really a complex and very different thing for different people.
Well, I think, well, I mean, it's difficult, first of all. It's not easy. And I think it's often putting up with the kind of feelings of stress and anxiety at talking. I mean, I guess if us three ended up going back into the workplace, we're all right, because we're kind of quite loud, extroverted type characters. You know, we wouldn't find any trouble talking, you know, but a lot of people are very shy and they find it very difficult. And they need to be given kind of clear messages and signs that we're listening to them actually, and actually interested in what they're saying and interested in their experience. Because I think folk like that, it's all too easy for them to kind of, you know, fade into the background a little bit, you know. So it's about putting structures in place where, you know, to go back to what Marteka said as well, where everybody has a voice and everybody gets heard and everybody's voice is respected and listened to. And that's easy to say, but very difficult to do. But if we think about how companies have adapted to online working, you know, whenever it was 15 months ago or 18 months ago, if you'd have said to the average company, well, you know, in a month, you've all got to work from home, you've all got to work online, that has said, no, it's impossible, that'll take at least 2 years or something, you know. But organizations managed to do that in a matter of weeks. Now, and again, to go back to what Marteka said earlier, if you can do that very effectively, and it worked great for most companies, you know, we can also adapt to, you know, to the return to work in a hybrid working, you know, if we put the same will and energy into it. Well, if you're going back to work and you're anxious about it, I think the first thing to do is to recognize and acknowledge your own anxiety and think, well, this is going to be difficult. You know, I'm not good at change. It took me a long time to adjust to working at home, and I've got to go back to work. Oh my God, you know. So what I suppose what I'm saying is, don't beat yourself up. Don't be self-critical. Acknowledge it's going to be difficult, like anything. You know, like your first day at school or like your first day in that job. It's going to be hard. But the more you do it, the easier it'll be. And often the problem isn't the actual going back to work. It's, let's say, the anticipatory anxiety. So people are worried about it and they get themselves all worked up. And by lunchtime, they're thinking, God, what did I have to worry about? It's fine. I'm actually quite enjoying chatting to people again, you know. But the danger is, if you get too anxious and too worked up about it, you avoid it. You think, oh, I'm really worried about this, so I'll tell the boss I prefer to stay and work at home, and you end up a bit lonely and a bit cut off from things. So I'd say acknowledge that it's difficult. Anything worthwhile in life is hard. So it's going to be hard, but it's probably not going to be half as hard as you think it would be. If that makes sense.
So there's that kind of anticipation bit, is having that chat to yourself of it's not as hard as I think it's going to be, and also thinking about what's the support. Like the first day at school keeps coming into my head of kind of, you know, it was, when I'll walk you to the gates, or, you know, who's a friend that you can go in with, or like, you know, it's only until 4 o'clock this afternoon. It's there's the milestone, or you'll have lunchtime, whatever. So, you know, there's some strategies there. What Marteka, I mean, in terms of the kind of ongoing habits, because I you know, yes, there's that first bit. There's also a worry that this will be a kind of flash in the pan, fashionable, almost kind of like, hey, we're back. Oh no, we're back to normal now. It's a week. You know, shut up about it. So, you know, what kind of like ongoing tips did you have?
Again, I think it depends on the organisation and the organisational culture. I think that one of the things that I've been doing with organisations is, you know, holding a space where we talk about returning to work and some of those anxieties, because I think that if we're able to speak about our anxiety, it provides some form of containment, or, you know, a place where you can kind of get some support around it. So I think the important thing, though, is like between your manager and your colleagues, that you're able to have those conversations ongoing, that, you know, we're intentional in our hybrid workplaces about creating those spaces. Now, you know, I talk about safe spaces, but it could actually just be your team huddle. It could be your team meeting. It could be, you know, if you're using Zoom still and, you know, partly hybrid, digital, online, partly in an office space, you know, you could have a mixture, and it looks really different, doesn't it? I mean, Michael talks about, you know, those kind of informal settings that we've put in place on, you know, on Zoom while we've been at home. It could be in a space like that. So I think it's going to look different for different organisations. But I do think as leaders, we do have a responsibility to be more mindful that this is a challenge for some people. I mean, you said initially that you're someone that's kind of looking forward to going back to seeing people in person, and some people are going to love it. It's going to be, you know, that are really good for them and really good for their work-life balance. But others are super anxious, and actually, how do we give a space for that? And not everyone wants to talk about their mental health openly, and that's okay too. So it's thinking about it at all those sort of different layers, I guess.
Actually, there was one really good idea before we got into the sidetracked into teenage, and it was this: if you've got a hybrid model of working, actually scheduling in 1 day a quarter where the team meet, and also scheduling in a social evening as well, so going out for a meal or something together. So at least 1 day every quarter, which is pretty minimal, everybody meets together but also has a good time in the evening, which I thought was a great idea, actually.
Marteka, how about for you? What were some of the themes that came out on your table?
I think for what struck out to me was kind of how different workforces. So, you know, some are going to be in the office and want to be, some definitely don't want to come back. Some are going to do a bit of both. And, you know, particularly for kind of, this didn't come up in the discussion, but I was just thinking about, you know, frontline work and how kind of they've been out all along and nothing's changed. So, you know, when you've got kind of a mixed model of employees, how do you know, make sure everyone's needs are being met and kind of personalized stuff? I think it's a challenge particularly for managers, for leaders. And the other really important discussion, and I think this is left off a lot actually, is about self-care. And, you know, for people that are kind of leading the way on this and, you know, taking care of others, actually, how do you take care of yourself and how do you prioritize your own mental health and self-care? And I think sometimes we forget that.
It's a really good shout that there's the kind of, you know, looking after self versus looking after others versus the kind of looking after the dynamics, as it were. And something that came up in the conversations I just had was around, sometimes there's very different kind of, there's a danger it's going to become cliques, right? Of like, you know, people who've been on furlough for forever and are just coming back, people who've been holding the fort. And, you know, the grass looks greener on both sides. You know, that if you've been at work, then someone was describing about like someone rocks in with a suntan, having been, you know, on furlough for forever and, you know, mastered Russian fluently or whatever. Whereas, you know, people that on furlough are going like, I've been on much less pay, my skills are rusty, you know. So it's that kind of like very easy to get into that kind of them and us. So what I'm picking up from today is self-care, other care, and also the kind of dynamics, the culture. And there's some interesting questions about how do we make sure we don't dilute our culture, or do we don't lose, you know, so that whole, how do we, you know, have in recontract, as it were, what the team rules are, is going to be interesting. So go on.
How do you reinvigorate people and keep them motivated, you know, especially if you're feeling a bit sort of flat? I think that there's a bit of fatigue being on Zoom, certainly with, you know, being locked down, not locked down, and you know, all these sort of changes, new variants. I think it's been quite a tiring year for everyone, and obviously some people have experienced loss and bereavement. So I think there really is an opportunity for that reinvigoration and motivation of people, and just taking stock and, you know, where are we at, and really kind of understanding that, I think is really key.
Cool.
I think if you're a manager, manage people's time boundaries, you know, talking about getting tired and so on, make sure people finish on time, make sure people have breaks. Now, if you either work for a bad organization or you work for an organization who leaves it to you, do that for yourself. Look after yourself. Make sure that you have breaks. Make sure, I mean, of all the research I reviewed for this book, the big finding was people can do a really tough job, but if they're able to switch off at the end of the day, they're at very low risk of burnout. So if your organization's not managing your time, you damn well make sure you manage your own time and say, right, it's whatever, 6 o'clock, I'm finished now, and go and watch Netflix or something, you know.
Yeah.
But don't just carry on working all day.
It's that recharge, that analogy of recharging the battery really is, yeah. Marteka, how about for you? What you were kind of...
I would say comparison kills. Like, you know, you have to do what's kind of right for you, and don't worry about what other people are doing around you in terms of, you know, what's comfortable for you in sort of returning to the office. So just be really clear on kind of, you know, what your needs are, and be able to communicate that with your manager and your team. So everyone has you know, an expectation of kind of what they're gonna get.
So I'm going to say a massive thank you to Marteka and Michael for sharing your thoughts, your vulnerabilities, your advice, your kind of warts and all honesty. Massively appreciated. Thank you to everyone for coming and chatting so openly on the tables. Do hang around and chat some more, but I'm going to finish presentation mode here. Wish everyone very good luck.